Hey, this is Carrie Canary Quilts, and we are working on the piece and quilt along that Fashion Quarter Shop is doing. If you're unfamiliar with this, they started a quilt along, I think it was in March or April, and it's the piece and quilt that is from this book called Celebrate with Quilts by Lissa Alexander and Susan Aki. And as you can see, we've got some blocks done. I even have the first 2 rows going in, but what I am doing with this is they sold a It's So Emma paper piece package to go along with the blocks in here. And so my videos for this are mostly around which one of these It's So Emma paper pieces to use and how to use them if you're unfamiliar with it and you bought the kit. So you can see what these look like if you've never seen them. You can find out which ones to use because sometimes it's a little difficult to figure that out. But anyway, that's what I'm going to do today. So we have 3 blocks this week. We have, we have the 9-inch Avenue block, and we make 4 of them. These are the 4 I made. There is actually no paper piecing in this, so I won't be showing these blocks. One note to make, which when I looked ahead in the pattern, I did not notice that 2 of these blocks were done in opposite colors. So where you see color prints in mine, that would be white in 2 of these. I think it looks great. I didn't notice it till I actually put all my blocks together, and I was noticing that they weren't putting colors together here. So when I went back and looked, I noticed it. So if you're looking ahead, you haven't done these blocks, and you want it to be like theirs, just make note that 2 of these need to be opposite from the other 2 in their colors. So just a little heads up. I'm not changing it. I think it looks beautiful. So the other block we have is the 9-inch maple leaf, which I have way over here. And that does have some paper piecing in it. It will have some flying geese, which I show you how to use these little pads for the flying geese from It's So Emma. And then we have 6 and 9-inch Texas puzzle blocks. So I have one Texas puzzle right here. The 6-inch doesn't go in the quilt yet, so I haven't put that up. But I did it in 2 different colorways, and you'll see that when I do it. And this has half square triangles in it. So let's see. Yeah, half square triangles in it here that I show you how to use, which ones to use and how to use them here. So that's what I'm doing in this series of Piece and Quilt, is going through their foundation paper piecing pack that they sold with this if you bought it. You do not need to foundation paper piece any of these blocks to do this quilt. If you're interested in grabbing the book, I have a link down below. I have a link to the It's So Emma paper pieces if you want to check it out. And oh, one more thing. Let me grab it. I forgot. In the Sew Sampler last month, we got one of these pads. I think it's called Woven Star. Yeah, it's called Woven Star. This is also an It's So Emma paper piece pad. And it makes a block like that. So I'm going to show you how these work also. It's So Emma has several different blocks they sell in these pads. I've done the Snail's Trail also. From the paper piecing, and I love to paper piece. I love how the blocks turn out. They just turn out really square and precise, as you can see. So after Piece and Quilt, I'm going to go through this real quick. There we go. I'm going to go through this real quick and show you how this one works too if you're interested. Anyway, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button, notification bell. You can do this and all the other fun stuff we got going on here. So let's start our Piece and Quilt. To get started on our August Piece and Quilt, we will be doing 3 different blocks. We have the 9-inch Avenue block, which we need to make 4 in 4 different colorways. 1 9-inch maple leaf block, and a 6 and 9-inch Texas puzzle. So the 9-inch Avenue block does not need to be paper piece. So this is what my pieces look like. And they didn't take very long to put together at all. It was a lot of fun. I like picking the colors out too. So there's the Avenue blocks. The maple leaf block is on page 52, and I'm going to show you the paper pieces. If you're using the It's So Emma paper pieces that Fat Quarter Shop sold for this quilt, I'm going to show you which ones to use and how to use them. Okay, maple leaf block is on page 52. This is what it's going to look like. So what we need for this is we're going to be doing 4 flying geese. You can see them around here on the outside. We will need the 1.5 by 3 inch finished flying geese blocks if you bought the package. And we will need 2 pieces from the pad, because each piece makes 2 flying geese. And then for the rest of the pieces, I've cut them here, and the difference you need to make when you're cutting is these 4 rectangles. They tell you to cut 8. You only need to cut 4 because the other 4 we're going to be basically incorporating in here. So these are the same cuts. This you only cut 4 instead of 8, and then we need to do 4 flying geese. For the flying geese, this is what we have. 1.5 inch by 3 inch flying geese. This is the It's So Emma pads for flying geese. And you need 2 pieces from the pad. The pad tells you how big to cut for the base, the number 1 piece. And it said 4 1/4 by 5 inches. I did a 5 inch block. That's going to cover it plenty. It was easier for me to cut a 5 inch block. So I cut 2 5 inch blocks. And then for the corners, for 2 and 3, this one's a little big. That's because it's not supposed to be in there. I think it's supposed to be there. Yeah. All right. So we need 4 squares that we're going to cut on the diagonal. So it calls for 2 squares per page. We have 2 pages, so I have 4 squares, just like I have 2 of these blocks. So these, I'm just going to stack them up. Since it's paper piecing, we don't have to be precise. And I'm just going to cut all 4 of them at the same time on the diagonal. And the instructions do tell you, it's right on the back here. Right here, cutting instructions to be able to do the flying geese. It also gives you instructions on how to make these flying geese too. So we have our triangles, we have our background pieces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to put my background, my number 1 piece, face up, and it just needs to be lined up with this dotted line on the outside. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go over to my machine and I'm going to just tack it down right here and right here to hold it in place. Here's my stitches to tack down my fabric on the back, and your fabric just needs to be basically on this dotted line on the outside. So this makes it so that I don't have to pin it and the pin doesn't get in the way when I start trimming. So the first thing we want to do is trim for number 2, and I'm going to do all my number 2s at once. So I'm going to put my cardboard on the line between 1 and 2. I'm going to fold it on the line, grab my 1/4 inch, add a 1/4 inch ruler, and I'm going to trim just like that. And then I'm going to go on the other side. Oops. I should have put it on 3. I put my tacking stitches up there where I cut for 2. Got my tacking stitch over here by 3. So now I'm going to come to the other end and trim at number 2 like that. So now we've got our piece that looks like this on the back. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. All right, there's my 2 pieces trimmed up, ready for my triangle. So what we want to do is, let me draw this out so you can see it. Right here's the edge of my block. So we want to center our piece, our triangle, along this edge that we trimmed. And I just kind of eyeball it, make sure my point just kind of lines up with my corner here. So once you have it lined up, you'll turn it over, you'll make sure your stitch is at a lower stitch length so that it perforates the paper. And then you'll go over there and you will, to the machine, and you'll stitch right along here. You can lock stitch at each point right here. I'm going to do that for all 4 of my number 2s. All right, here's my 4 triangles sewn on to the number 2 spot. And you can see my seams right here. At number 2, I sewed right on the line. So now we're going to go over the iron and we're going to iron towards the corner. Here's my 4 triangles, iron towards the corner. We're going to flip this back over and we're going to trim now on all the number 3 lines. Pull it back, add a quarter, trim. And I'm going to do that on all 4 of my 3s. All 4 of my 3s are trimmed up. So now we're going to take the rest of my triangles. Let me draw out my corner that I need to cover. There's the corner. So I'm going to flip it over, right sides together, line up my points, and then sew on the line between 1 and 3 right there. And I'm going to repeat for all the 3s along here. Here's what it looks like with my number 3s on. So I'm now going to iron these out towards the corners, and then we'll come back and get our flying geese trimmed out of these. There we go. They're always real ugly till we get them trimmed out. So we need to cut these out, and it tells you on the paper to trim on this line. So we're going to trim all the way around our flying geese on the solid line. So I'm going to butt my ruler up against the solid line and trim it. And I'm going to do that on all 4 sides. First, and then we need to trim the 2 away from each other. So trim on that line and trim on this line. There we go. There's our beautiful flying geese. Nice and perfect flying geese. So I'm going to get this one trimmed up and then we'll lay our block out. So at this point, you can trim the papers off if you want. I think I'll do that. And or you can leave them in. Doesn't matter. But since you used a very small stitch length, the paper just comes right off. And you're left with that perfect flying geese. Let's get it laid out. Our flying geese. So we need our A and then a flying goose with it pointing towards the center. And then another background. And then we need a square. We need a white square. And then I need a yellow square. And then another rectangle and then square, square. That's going to go in the middle. And our flying geese are going to go on the outside with rectangles in between. I think I forgot to cut a 4th rectangle. All right, there's 3 rows. It's going to go together by row. It could go together with corners and centers. It's up to you how you want to do it, I guess. The instructions are telling us to do it by row. So that's what I'm going to do. And then this is going to go there, 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 and there. So that's how you do the flying geese. Again, if you bought the paper piece kit that Fat Quarter Shop sold for this, you'll be using the 1.5 by 3 inch flying geese for this block. All right, I'm going to get this put together and we'll move on to the next block. And there we go. There's my 9-inch maple leaf block. That wasn't too hard. Didn't take very long to put together. So I've got 5 blocks already. 2 more to go. The next block we're working on is the Texas puzzle. And we're going to do a 6 and a 9-inch. So we need 4 half square triangles in each corner. So for the 6-inch square, we're going to need the triangles on a square, or triangles on a roll that are 2.5 inch finished half square triangles. Then for the 9-inch square, we're going to need triangles on a roll that are 3 3/4 inch finished half square triangles. So I'm using 2 different colorways for my 2 blocks. This is going to be the smaller block. This is going to be the larger block. I'm using the same background, which I need to get in here. So for each block, we need 4 half square triangles. So we need to cut 4 off of our rolls. And for the 2.5 inch finished, one row here makes 4 half square triangles. So I'm just going to cut on the solid line between the rest of this row and the rest of the triangles. And that is the smaller one, so that's going to go with that. And then the 3 3/4 inch finished, each square here makes 2. So I'm just going to cut this section off at the bottom, and I'm going to cut 2 squares off on the solid line. So there we go. That's the larger one. For the larger 9-inch block, it's 3 3/4 inch finished. And for the smaller 6-inch blocks, it's 2.5 inch finished. All right. For the larger block, these are the extra pieces I need to cut to finish out my block. So I'm going to just set those aside. And I'm going to just lay out my 2 fabrics together. I have 2 fat quarters. All right. They're sitting on top of each other. And what I want to do is I need a big enough piece to go all the way around this. So it tells you how big to cut a square or the width. I don't do that. I just cut around it. So I have a corner missing down here. So that's why it's pulled over. So I'm just going to cut like that. I have plenty of distance with both pieces outside of these solid lines. All right, that's for the larger piece. I need the white again. And then I need to put the other yellow and my white together. Let's do it by selvage with the white on top because that's got a piece missing. All right, here's for my second piece. And that's not big enough. But if we go like this, so, oh, I see what's happening there. Okay. So I'm just going to do this because I have cut from my yellow. I'm going to lay it out like this, cut it so there's fabric around all the edges. And there we go. That's how I do it. But like I said, these will tell you the width you need to cut. Then you just cut the length that you need. So what we want to do is we want to put right sides together with our fabrics. Lay our paper over it. I'm going to grab some pins. I'm just going to pin in the corner here, since I'm doing a V in the middle with the stitching. That way my pins won't get in the way. That one's pinned. Now take the other one, right sides together. You want your paper face up. Make sure there's plenty of fabric around the outside edges. And again, we're doing a V in the middle. So I am going to pin in these corners. All right, we're ready to head over to the machine. With your stitch length taken down to a smaller stitch. We will go over and we will stitch following these arrows on the dotted line. So follow the arrows, the dotted lines. And that's what I'm going to do. And then we'll come back and we can get these cut up. I've got my seam sewn. It is hard to see. I used yellow thread. But you can see I sewed on the dash lines and I went in the direction of the arrows. So what we want to do now is trim on all the solid lines. So I'm going to trim my longest lines first. And then I'm going to cut down the middle on this solid line. Oops, I need to cut out here. And then trim or cut right down the center solid line, the diagonal. And that's where we get our half square triangle. There we go. And we will be ironing these towards the darker fabric. Let's just put it that way. All right, I'm going to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to get trimmed up on all the solid lines and then get it ironed and we'll lay our block out. All right, there are the two different size half square triangles we need for our two different blocks. So my first block is the bigger one, and this is going to be how it gets laid out. It's going to look. Nice thing is no matter how you're sewing, you're always going to iron towards these strips right here. That makes it very easy. All right, so there's the bigger one, and the smaller one is going to look like this. So I'm going to get them put together. And that would complete the piece and quilt blocks for this week. Or this month, I should say, for the month of August. Cool, I like it. There we go. There's my last two blocks. I think they were called Texas Puzzles. I already put my book away. Turned out really cute. 9-inch and a 6-inch. And then our maple leaf. And our... I can't remember what these were called either. I got COVID brain right now. That's what I got. So there we go. August piece and quilt blocks are done. Showed you which paper pieces to use. And I hope that helps you. Let me know how it's going for you too. All right. So another thing I want to do in this video is, since we're working with It's Sew Emma paper pieces, I got one in Sew Sampler last month called the Woven Star. This is, it says it's fantastic for charm packs, which I got in my Sew Sampler. It does 4.5-inch unfinished blocks. There's 42 sheets in each pad. And it's 4-inch finished block. So this is a more complicated one than we've been doing with the half square triangles and stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to go through one of these to show you how this one works with the paper piecing. You want to make sure you know how you want your fabrics to look in here. I'm going for this scrappy look where there will be 8 different fabrics. So I have, I need 4 large cuts and 4 smaller cuts. So I have 8 fabrics here from my charm pack. And then this is my background. So it tells you on the inside what you need to cut. So from my prints out here, I need 4 2 by 2.5-inch rectangles. So I'll do these 4. I'll cut 1 from each of 2 by 2.5, and then these next 4 will be 2 by 3s, 1 of each from each print. Then from my light pieces, I need 2 3-inch squares cut on 1 diagonal, and then 4 2 3/4-inch squares cut on 1 diagonal. So I will get all those cuts made and show you what they look like, and then we'll get these cut on the diagonal too. One thing it also does, kind of gives you an outline or a look at what all the different size quilts would look at like with this fabric pattern. So there's a wall hanging, a crib quilt, a table runner, a lap quilt, and a large lap quilt is the background. And it also gives you step-by-step instructions on how to do it too. So I'm going to follow these, and I'm going to show you also how I'm doing it. So let me get my pieces cut. Here's my cut. I accidentally cut the longer one from the light colors. Doesn't matter. Here's the longer strips we need, one from each color or each print that I had, and the shorter strips, one from each of those prints that I had. I have my 2 larger squares it told me to cut, and I have 4 of the slightly smaller squares it told me to cut. Now, what they want you to do is take all 4 of these and these 2, and we're going to cut them on one diagonal. So I'm just going to cut all 4 of them at the same time. And we get our triangles. That produces 8 of them. This one will produce 4 triangles. There we go. So those are the pieces we need to do this. So the first thing they want us to do is trim this into quarters before we even start, and that's what this line is right here, this dotted line. And it does say first trim line. So I'm just going to take a larger ruler, and I'm going to put it right on that dotted line and trim it. And then we'll do the same thing again on the dotted line in between the 2 that are left. All right. There we go. So now we end up with these 4 pieces. So we will start putting our pieces together. So our number 1 piece. So one thing I do want to mention is in the instructions it does tell you that this is placement 2, or you see the number 2. This one is 3, and that's going to go wherever you see 3. And then the larger triangles are placement 1 right here. And then the smaller triangles are 4 and 5. So that's how you know which pieces to use where. So I'm going to do 1. A lot of times I would do all 4 at once, but I'm going to do 1. And our placement 1 is the larger of the triangles. And it says to, all right, I've drawn out the pieces on the back so that you can see them, because that's where we're going to place our fabrics. So the instructions tell you to lay 1 down and then turn it over, fold on the line, trim it. I don't do that. I usually just place it 1/4 of an inch past the line. So right now I am about 1/4 of an inch past number 2 right here and number 3 over here. So I'm going to take my number 2, which is the shorter of these strips, and I'm going to just line it up in the corner, because it's at least 1/4 of an inch past this seam right here. It's plenty past this seam right there. So now we're going to turn it over and we're going to sew on this line right here between 1 and 2. And I would do a lock stitch right there. That's what I like to do. It just ends that stitch so it doesn't get cut if you're trimming. And I don't trust sewing over it for some reason, so I lock stitch right there, and sometimes I lock stitch down here also. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sew on this line and lock stitch right there. Oh, make sure that your machine is set to a lower stitch length also. Sometimes I forget. Another thing you can do is hold this up. I have light behind me over here, behind the paper, so I can see my fabric and where it's placed to make sure that I have coverage over all my lines. So you can do that with a light behind it and see it also. There's my first 2 pieces. If we fold it over, it goes off the paper, so it's plenty big. I'm going to get this ironed down and then we'll trim for the next piece. All right, there's my piece ironed down. Let's turn it over, and we want to trim between 2 and 3. So basically 1, 2, and 3 on that line right here. So we're going to fold it back off that line. Should be about 1/4 inch. That's pretty close. And now we need to get ourselves a number 3 placement, which is the longer rectangle. So I'm going to line this up. I'm going to line it up with the edge of the paper because I'm going to be cutting it right here, which brings it plenty past the point we need to make sure we're hitting, which is right here. About right there. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to line it up with the edge of the paper. And I am going to now sew right here along this line between 1, 2, and 3. And let's see, we're going to have to fold for 4. So I'm probably going to stop sewing at that dot right there. I'll lock stitch right there. You don't have to, but that's what I'm going to do. There's this seam right here. I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to iron it this way. 4 and 5 are on opposite sides and they're not going to touch with their seams, so I'm going to trim them both and put them both on while I'm at the machine. All right, there it is, trimmed up. And now we want to take these smaller ones, because these are the 4 and 5 placements. The orientation of the triangle is like that. I am going to turn it over, and I'm just going to line it up with my fabric right here. So we'll sew on this line right there between 2 and 5, and then I'm going to repeat for number 4 over here. There we go. There's the first piece done, and you can see we can't see any paper, so that's a good sign that we've got really good coverage on this. All right, now the rest of these are going to be exactly the same as this one, and what I usually do is I'll do 1 and 2 on all 3 of them at the same time. I'll get them all ready, and then I'll go over to my machine. I'll sew them all at the same time and iron them all at the same time. Come back and trim them all at the same time. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get it lined up. I'm going to go sew it. I'm going to do it here also with these 2, and then keep repeating over and over till I finish them. Here's my 4 pieces done. They don't look like much right now, but that's what they look like on that side. Let's turn them over. What we need to do now is trim on the solid line out here. There is a dashed line in here, and that does say sewing line. We aren't going to be, that's not where you want to cut. One thing you can do is you can use the sewing line as your 1/4 inch. I do that a lot. Like I'll put my 1/4 inch on the sewing line and then I'll trim it. But that comes out on the solid line. So that's what you want to do, is trim on that outer solid line. There is no sewing line on the bottom. There we go. That looks a little better, doesn't it? I'm going to get all these trimmed up, and then we'll see how we put these together. There we go. There's my 4 pieces trimmed up. Now you can just arrange them how you want to. I like that scrappy look. So what the instructions tell you to do is to put these together on their sides like this. And there are dots that we saw when we were sewing. There's these dots on each side, and you want to line those dots up. Now, you can see the seams, and you can line them up that way, or you can take a pin and put it through the dot and see if it comes out the other dot. And it did perfectly, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to line up corners and seams, but you can use the dots also. Just going to throw a pin right in there. And then we'll do the same thing with this one. Line up that right angle. Make sure the seams line up, and they do. I'm going to throw a pin in there. This is where the sewing line comes in. We're going to go over to our machine with us with the stitch length smaller again, and we're going to sew right on that sewing line, that dashed line you see right there. And then we'll press our seam open. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to sew in this dashed sewing line. There we go. There's my first two halves. Ironed my seam open. Now we just put these together, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up my seams, and I line up that center seam, and everything else falls into place. So that is how I'm going to do it, or you can use the dots like they say to do. And there's a sewing line here also. So we'll sew on this dashed line, and we'll press this seam allowance open also. They did say that you could tear the paper out right here to create less bulk. So let's do that since that's in the instructions. I'm just tearing it from where I open the seam allowance. Okay, let's put these back together. Let's pin it. Yeah, it feels better. And then we'll sew it and iron our seams open. There we go. Our 4-inch woven star. I'm just going to trim my tails. Pretty easy. I thought it'd be a little more time consuming, but it's not. And I like they give you they give you really good, not pretty good. They give you really good cut sizes to use. Which getting cut sizes is a huge part of paper piecing. A lot of times you don't get cut sizes. You're kind of on your own. So you can have all your pieces all laid out and ready to go. There we go. Woven Star. It's So Emma paper piece. Foundation paper piecing. And this one says it's fantastic for 5-inch charm packs, pre-cuts, and scraps. So that's what I used, was a charm pack that I got in my sew sampler. And that's all it took from these 8 charm packs. So that's pretty cool. Just wanted to show you. It's fun to look at the It's So Emma foundation paper pieces and see all the patterns that they've got. They've got several different patterns, and the instructions that they do lay out, if you are even kind of familiar with paper piecing, are very good. So there you go. Well, that was fun. Showed you a different It's So Emma paper piecing. We did our piece and quilt today with the paper piecing. I love paper piecing. Let me know how it's going for you. And hit the subscribe button, notification bell if you're new here. And we can have fun together. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.